As of today, 7 individuals of the 147 passengers and crew have been reported ill. Sadly, 3 have died. 1 patient is in intensive care in South Africa, although we understand that this patient is improving. Assess the risk of the passengers that are actually on board. As I said, there are no other symptomatic patients who are on board, so that is planned. As of today, 7 individuals of the 147 passengers and crew have been reported ill. Sadly, 3 have died. 1 patient is in intensive care in South Africa, although we understand that this patient is improving, while 2 patients are still on board the ship and are being prepared for medical evacuation to the Netherlands for treatment. In our disease outbreak news that we published late last night, we did mention a 3rd suspected case who reported a mild fever at one point, and that would make this the total of 7 cases, 2 confirmed and 5 suspected. This person, I'm happy to say, is currently doing well and is asymptomatic. The plan now is for the ship to continue on to the Canary Islands. We're working with Spanish authorities who will welcome the ship, have said that they will welcome the ship, to do a full investigation, a full epidemiologic investigation, full disinfection of the ship, and of course to assess the risk of the passengers that are actually on board. As I said, there are no other symptomatic patients who are on board, so that is planned. So once the 2 sick individuals on board are medically evacuated, then the ship can move. And with the timing of the incubation period of hantavirus, which can be anywhere from 1 to 6 weeks, our assumption is that they were infected off the ship, perhaps doing some activities there. This was an expedition boat, and many of the people on board were doing bird watching. They were doing, a lot of things with wildlife. So our assumption is they were infected off the boat and then joined the cruise. The cruise did stop at many different islands up the coast of Africa, and again, seeing a lot of different wildlife. On those islands, there are birds. Some islands have a lot of rodents, others don't. So there could be some source of infection on the islands as well for some of the other suspect cases. However, we do believe that there may be some human-to-human transmission that's happening among the really close contacts, the husband and wife, people who've shared cabins, etc. So again, our assumption is that has happened, and that's why we are operating and working with the ship to make sure that anyone who is symptomatic, anyone caring for patients is wearing full personal protective equipment. The medical personnel who have boarded the boat have brought additional PPE as well. So that's our working assumption. But just again, contextually, hantaviruses don't typically transmit that way. It's really a rodent infection. Our working assumption is that it is the Andes virus. It could not be, but we're assuming that it is until we determined otherwise, because we do know that in the past there has been some limited human-to-human transmission with this virus. The point being, regardless of which virus it actually is, we do know that some of the cases have had very close contact with each other, and certainly human-to-human transmission can't be ruled out. So as a precaution, this is what we are assuming so that we could take the necessary further precautions to limit onward spread.
Como disse, o hospital já preparou lugar.
As I said, the hospital has already prepared an area with isolation capacity should it be necessary, demonstrating our mobilization and response capabilities. A dedicated team has been formed with doctors, infectious disease specialists, nurses, and laboratory technicians to support patients on board and, if necessary, also on land. During the preparation and response, we calculated several types of scenarios. Eventually, as we did not initially know the clinical state of the patients, this part of the hospital response was properly safeguarded in case of need. But what is verified at the moment is that there is no need for this transfer of the patients to the hospital because the need for hospital intervention is not verified. However, in case of need, we have to reevaluate, and we are in conditions, in case necessary, to make this transfer with the highest degree of security, taking into account that the country and all consumables are already stored, the equipment of individual protection for the effect.
de fazer essa transferência com o mais nível.
What's interesting about this is it's occurring on this cruise ship where there's people that have been isolated together for quite a bit of time. The cruise ship originated in Argentina, and there's two types of hantaviruses. There's hantaviruses that cause cardiopulmonary syndrome, where they infect the blood vessel cells in the lung, cause them to become leaky so that fluid leaks out into the lung and causes lung and cardiac problems. And those viruses are found in North, South, and Central America, and different viruses within that group cause this disease. Second group of hantaviruses causes hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. And so that's more targeted towards the kidney. So you get more of a kidney syndrome. And those viruses are found mostly in Europe and Asia, but there's one of them that it infects black and brown rats, and those are spread throughout the world. So one of the main questions with this case is this Andes, a hantavirus that came from South America that was brought on the cruise ship, or it was something on the cruise ship and the rodents, if there were rodents on that ship, or did it get picked up along the way at the different stops? So that's where some of the investigations are going to be looking at now.
PhD students. Franny is she's a fourth year PhD student, and then Jordan, who you met was here a second ago, is a third year.
So for the viruses that cause the cardiopulmonary syndrome, there's no approved vaccines or therapeutics. Treatment is supportive care. Our group is working with collaboration out of Albert Einstein College of Medicine with Kartik Chandran, a couple of consortiums called Prometheus and Provident, and there's other groups as well that are involved in this effort to try to find drugs against these viruses, try to find vaccines against these viruses, and they can be quite different. So one of the hopes is we can find broadly protective vaccines and therapeutics. And so there's a lot of research going on with that. There's been some promising vaccines and therapeutics that are shown to be effective in animal models. And so the hope is to try to get funding to move some of these into clinical trials. And there's some early stage clinical trials going on with some other groups as well. So there is research on this. In the Americas, hantavirus infection is very serious, but it's also quite rare. And so that's for a time that probably led to less research into it because of funding priorities. But I know there's been a lot of interest in funding hantavirus work of late.
Other ways we can get funding. So that's why I live in my office in the Grace Road.
The early symptoms of hantavirus infection are very similar to more common infections like the flu. So people have headaches, they have body aches, they've got GI issues, and then it can proceed very rapidly after that first prodrome to severe respiratory symptoms such as shortness of breath, extreme fatigue, and then it can lead very quickly to death if not in extreme circumstances. So a lot of times I think there probably is misdiagnosis because it's pretty rare. We also don't know how many people that get infected have mild or no symptoms. So there's active research in my lab looking at, are there cases that we're missing because they're mild or they're asymptomatic? We usually just see people that get really, really sick because that's when people go to the hospital, and for hantavirus infection, it's like, oh, okay, this is pretty severe, but we don't know how many people might get infected and might have mild symptoms or no symptoms or severe symptoms, and it's misdiagnosed.
And so instead of doing one at a time, you can see here we can do 8 to 12 at a time.
Oh, since the beginning.
Pretty much.